And as you were saying, like there's still so much violence going on in northeastern state of Manipur. But whereas at the same time there's a G20 happening in Delhi presently. So if you see that different, the opposite sides of states being in the same country, do you feel how will you say that how the center reacts to the northeastern state of Manipur?
As many others have pointed out in the past, and cutting across community lines, the way in which the central government has behaved, or not behaved, as some would put it, is more than what one expected. One expects that they would have intervened not just through the military and the paramilitary forces which have come in Manipur, but through other different stages. I'm sure they are also trying to intervene, but it is not visible on the ground. The effects are not visible on the ground. Sure. And as I mentioned earlier, the situation has not improved, which means that there could be more from the central government. So the top leadership, one wishes, would take this as a very serious matter, and I think it is indeed a very, very serious matter that has happened. Such a level of violence, I don't think India has seen in post-partition India. So I think the seriousness of what has happened, the violence that has happened in Manipur, one wishes that the central leadership would take that into cognizance and respond accordingly. So that's something I think that
let me get something clear. You are a professor of history. Now, as you were saying, like this is the we're crossing the fourth month since May 3rd of this violence. In history of India, is there any other communal violence which have gone on so far as to reach 4 months, a timeline, and still going on, where there are sporadic firings, not only that, but there are killings, everything is happening, whereas this violence has extended a timeline of more than 4 months. So in history, would you just elaborate where this has happened in the Indian nation, in history, post-independence? Or is this something that Manipur has set a new record in the history of India?
There's no doubt that this is unprecedented. Unprecedented for two reasons, I would say. One is, as you rightly mentioned, the duration, right? It's been more than 4 months and it's still going, continuing, and there is no sign of any improvement on the ground. So in that sense, it is very unique, right? Of inter-ethnic conflict that we have seen in India. It is also unique in another sense of the term, and I think and something that we need to pay attention to, which is that in most of the religious conflicts that we have seen in India, what we have seen is there may be use of a few weapons, including guns, but the scale of weapons that we get to see in this conflict, I think that is unprecedented. So we're talking of really, really sophisticated weapons being used.
6,000 arms of different kinds.
And we don't even know if that is only, I mean, that's the figure that we know of arms which have been looted, of which one hears that about a few, maybe more than 1,000 has come back. But we are also talking of an area in which there is easy access to sophisticated guns if you have the money and the connections, being a border state. So I think that's what I meant when I say that the seriousness of the matter has to be taken by the central leadership, precisely because it is unprecedented. This is truly an extraordinary sort of event that we are witnessing in Manipur. Right? If we think of the whole sort of the or the whole violence as an event, then this is an extraordinary event we are witnessing in India. This seems to me more like the conflicts that we hear of in places like different parts of Africa, where you have different groups, sometimes based on ideology, sometimes based on ethnic lines, fighting one another.
Yes, yes.
One has also heard of similar sort of violence in Eastern Europe, especially at the time of and immediately after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So one talks about balkanization and the kinds of conflicts that one has heard there in places such as Sarajevo. One reads about these violent events that have happened in other parts of the world, but we are living through that violence. So in that sense, I think we're going through a very, very exceptional, extraordinary, traumatic event.
So, Professor, tell me this. I mean, people have said that for different type of wars, there is some interest of some parties. I mean, you take for example, whatever war there may be, but some seeks to gain something. It may be on the grounds of wealth, it may be on time areas of power, extending your reach, and for other capitalistic gains. So regarding this particular war, as you have said, which we are seeing in Manipur right now, this violence is happening across two communities now. In history, in Manipur or in the northeastern states, do you think this will leave a mark in the history chapters of the northeastern states, and especially this conflict being special and in a way a class apart? Because we have no idea what is happening now in some ways, who start and how it's going to end. So what are your thoughts on that?
Definitely, we can already see its ramifications even now as the violence is unfolding. We can see that it's affecting the neighboring states in the northeast already.
The communities also.
Yeah, the communities.
And Tangals are affected. The Maitit Tangals are affected.
Yes, absolutely. So when we say that it's a fight between two communities, we must also remember that the people who are affected are not necessarily only the members of these two communities, that everyone, irrespective of which community you belong to, if you happen to be in Manipur, you're affected. The degree of how you're affected may be slightly different, but there is no doubt that people are suffering, even if your community is not directly involved in this violence. Neighboring states are also affected because if you look at the neighboring states, a lot of people, including in Guwahati, people are coming out of Manipur. Whoever is in a difficult situation for job, for children's education, for healthcare, for a whole range of reasons. Some for a short-term purpose, some for a slightly long-term purpose. People are moving out of Manipur. So you have a huge sort of set of people who have come to Guwahati for a variety of reasons. So places like Guwahati, which has in a sense, which has not participated, which has not directly been
an exodus of sorts.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Guwahati has to witness that, and many other cities in the northeast would witness the same. One has heard of the same in Shillong earlier. So I think wherever you go in the northeastern state, the effects are there. So in that sense, it's not just for Manipur now. That when we think about the violence, we also have to think about how it is affecting the other states, the other communities.
Economically, also, we have seen that we have regressed. We have gone back to such an era, right, where there's no internet except for the broadband, and the mobile data is only given to those people who are in the upper echelons of the government system. And then the mobile people, that the common man, they have got is only left for calling people.
Yes.
They don't have the particular information on which to get some sort of service, as we have said that we usually have use our mobile phone for them. Now, what do you feel about this? The economy of our state and the different communities in tow. Yes, we take it that things have been set back, but how do you think this will reflect in the future?
Very bad. There's no doubt about that. Manipur, to begin with, was not in a good shape economically. We know that it's one of the poorest states in India, even before the violence. So it's it is a very, very high level of of people below the poverty line, for instance, right? So if you look at a lot of the indexes, which are government report indexes, you know that Manipur was doing very bad. We also know that last year, for instance, there was a drought-like situation. So a lot of the people who cultivate rice, so they were not able to have a good harvest. So it was very bad harvest last year.
In fact, the price of rice has gone up to 45 rupees per kg.
By Manipur standards, that's very high. That's
high.
Very, very high by Manipur standards. One must also remember that the best of the rice that you get in Manipur never touches 40 rupees.
Yes.
In other parts of the country, maybe very high. In Assam, for instance, Joha and a lot of the good rice may go up to 80, 90, but in Manipur, never.
Yes.
So we're looking at a very, very different situation. So very bad harvest last year. This year is going to be, as
even
we know, even worse. Even one is of course a natural factor that there's less water. The other is the trouble as a result of which people are not able to, especially in the foothills areas.
They have short farmers. I mean,
yes,
you must have witnessed in the last 3 days.
There have been reports of fear. I mean, in my village, people are, and including my own brothers, by the way, they have not been able to cultivate their plot of land because it happens to be in the foothill areas, and they are afraid. It's a risk to your life. So you're truly making a choice of sudden death
between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Sudden death of a sniper bullet hitting you, and a long, slow, painful suffering because you will not be able to cultivate and get a harvest. So it's a very dire situation that we are looking at.
I agree.
So economically, one can only imagine how terrible it will be.
Especially Manipur being an agrarian society.
Yes.
It's basically the farmers who are being affected.
Yes. And of course, loss of property and all of that you have to add.
Take into account.
So state focus will now have to be, the state government's focus will now have to be on resettling, rehabilitating the people who have been affected directly. So they may not have much of budget to be able to take care of the other poor people. So it's going to be a very, very challenging situation.
How fair do you feel that our state government is in dealing this situation now?
See, by now everyone accepts, I think, including the Chief Minister himself has said that there have been lapses from the very beginning. Insofar as how the situation is dealt with, by now everyone says that it's not being dealt with in a desirable manner, how it should have been done by a responsible government. And I think that there is no debate on that now.
Government has been irresponsible.
Yes, it has. I think it has not been able to bring down the violence. It has not been able to resettle
those displaced people. More than 50,000.
We have to think about their livelihood. We have to think about the education of the children. We have to think about their health care. So a whole range of issues that we have not been able to address.
That's the responsibility of the state government.
That has to be the responsibility of the government, both at the state level as well as the central level. Right?
Both.
So I think by now there is no confusion there, I think.
So, people have been crying out that we are deprived. We have been in this settlement for more than 3-4 months now. There's no money, there's no work. What do? We are at our wits' end.
Absolutely.
And that strike a chord in every Meitei's heart. I think it must have, because the calling of that we are about helpless We have nowhere to go now, and we have to start from zero again. The lives have to start from zero again. And as you have said, that the accountability that must be fixed and the responsibility of the state government, which is not actually happening now. But tell me, Professor, what do you see is the would be the way forward?
See, I mean, as I have said in a few times, I think we have to, when we think about the future, I think we have to segregate two aspects of it. One is a future wherein we need urgent attention. So that would mean bringing down violence, or at least a complete stop.
Whose duty is that?
Whose duty is that? That's the duty of the government.
Of the government, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
both state and
Which is not
and
happening
central government.
in a way right now.
It has not yet happened.
Yes.
They've not been able to bring down
The violence.
There is no cessation of violence. So that is something that we need to think
The
about
first
when
point,
we
yeah.
think about the future. The other very important point, and something that we need to keep repeating, is the condition of the people who have been displaced, especially women and children. And they're suffering. We have to do something about their future, and that needs immediate attention. Of course, I know that there have been some shelter homes which have been provided to them.
Yeah.
But what about their income? How are we going to be able to provide them livelihood?
Yeah.
Right? Even in the short term, I don't even at the moment. There are a lot of goodwill gestures from the local community, from the clubs, and also across the country and even the world. People who are helping with relief materials and others. But how long? How long will they be able to survive with the relief materials and the food that is given, provided by others? So we have to think about their livelihood as well.
Yes.
Right? So those are the issues. The overall law and order and the livelihoods of the displaced people. I think that needs urgent attention. So that's one part of thinking about the future. The other part of thinking about the future is to start a dialogue between the groups who are in this conflict, to start thinking about a lasting, enduring peace. So there could be different models of how we can do that. A lot of people have talked about reconciliation, for instance, like truth and reconciliation, something to that model. There doesn't have to be necessarily a fixed model at this point of time, but the condition for thinking about that lasting peace will come about only when the situation improves immediately. When we are able
that's why you're saying in the first time we need to bring the present law and shooting whatever violence to a stop.
Yes.
After that, you come to the situation of the displaced people, and at the third, you try to bring about a solution of sorts, which can be a work in progress.
Yes. But something that we must keep in mind, and we must envision that this cannot go on. This level of violence, this level of animosity cannot go on. It's not good for anyone. It's not good, especially for the children who are growing up, and we have to think of their future, if not ours. So to be able to move beyond that, I think we have to address that. Why are people feeling vulnerable, so vulnerable that they are ready to take up arms and defend themselves, right? It must come from certain kind of condition. So to bring about an enduring peace, we have to think about creating that condition. How do we talk about dialogue? How do we talk about reconciliation? Without that, we cannut have lasting peace.
Which will take time, obviously.
Which will take time. It's a time-consuming process.
That needs comes from the authority, that is the state government, and of course the central government is always there. They have to put their full efforts in. But we also need, as you're saying, we feel that we need the civil organizations of the state to also discuss, to break bread or whatever, to come on the table
Yes.
and perhaps hammer out, to listen to all the differences they have, and perhaps to hammer out a solution of sorts.
Yes, absolutely.
So at the end, we'll close with this a couple of questions more. Well, when do you think that this violence will ultimately end in some ways? And please tell me, if do you feel that it is only the Métis and the Cookies who are fighting with each other? Are we being made to fight? Are some people asking us to throw stones at each other? A third agent, somebody whom we still do not see clearly in this picture, and for some perhaps some gains which can be had from this conflict, and especially other trades, capitalistic agendas.
At this point, we really don't know much about why the violence started, for instance, which are the parties, and when I say parties, I mean the organizations involved and so on and so forth. But as you rightly pointed out, in my understanding, of course, it's difficult to substantiate at this point of time, but my understanding is that violence doesn't come out of nowhere. And I don't see...
As a student, as a teacher of history, I will take it from the horse's mouth that when something happens, there's something for obvious gain.
Yes, some people want to create a condition for violence so that they can benefit out of that. Most of the time, that is the condition. Of course, you may have exceptions like spontaneous violence, but spontaneous violence ends within a very short span of time. This is not in that sense. This is no longer spontaneous violence. It's becoming more like an intractable violence, right? Intractable conflict. So, which means that one can safely assume that there would be interested parties who would try to benefit out of this conflict. The only thing is, at this point, we don't know who may benefit out of this. That's why I think it's very important for us to also discuss this violence, at various levels, at various scales, and amongst ourselves with other people.
Would it mean also the Mera Paivis, the student organizations, the civil organizations?
I'm sure they're doing. I've not participated in any of those, so I can't say for sure. But what I'm saying is, we need to also look deeper rather than just looking at one incident of violence or another incident of violence and responding. We need to also look deeper to understand who may benefit from this violence. So there are guesses that people have thrown up. There are some. I'm calling them guesses because we don't have evidence at this point of time. But I think those are intelligent guesses that there could be reasons, different kinds of reasons, which is creating the condition for two communities to fight one another. So we need to do a lot of rigorous research. We need to do a lot of discussions, and try and ask people who know the area, who know Manipur, but as well as the larger northeastern region, along with people who know the other side, which is Burma, Myanmar, and Southeast Asia. People who know larger geopolitics, the sort of the rising tension between the US on the one hand and China on the other, right? So I think that there's a whole lot of areas where we can pay our attention, very close and critical attention, and investigate further. Right? I think that is what, especially as intellectuals, as people, as media persons, someone who has done a lot of investigative journalism. So people like us, I think, should be focusing, like to just find out and find the connections, right?
You have to connect the dots.
Absolutely. Has it got anything to do, for instance, to repeat myself, with the larger issue of this global conflict? So you have a global conflict, global sort of war happening in Ukraine right now, and as we know, Russia and some of its allies are on the one side, and then you have the whole Western, like the NATO, and its forces on the other hand. Something like what is happening in Manipur, will this be the spark to another confrontation between China-backed forces and other forces? We don't know, but we can't rule out either, because we know that there are a lot of flashpoints that we have seen. The military exercise, joint military exercise that was done between the US and the Philippines, for instance, the South China Sea conflict, the border conflicts. Recently there was the map of India, which was put up by the Chinese government, that has led to some kind of a diplomatic tension between India and China. So we have to locate what's happening in Manipur within this larger frame as well. And I think then we may be able to see certain aspects of this violence that we didn't pay enough attention to. That's my understanding. And that's also my my appeal to people who are in the vocation of trying to find out the truth, that we should look at every possible angle. We have to understand
this situation
deeper, a deeper understanding of what's happening in violence.
That will rely a lot more on not, let's leave politicians out of the situation, out of this frame, and it would mean like the academia, the intelligentsia of our state, and especially among the community, needs to converse, needs to have some sort of a brainstorming session, and then look at the geopolitical aspects, as you have pointed out right now, because some people, some observers have their opinion that maybe we are perhaps barking upon the wrong tree, and there are so much more than what meets the eye. And as professors rightly pointed out, that there are so many things which may be happening on not only bilateral issues between Myanmar and India, but so many countries which can have some sort of, and they want to have their fingers on the pie of Myanmar.
Yes.
And perhaps the big dragon, the Chinese.
Yeah. Just to add there, what we must also keep in what I just explained about the larger context is the fact that Manipur is central to realizing what we call Act East policy.
Yes.
Right? There is no Act East policy without Manipur at this current juncture, right? Because the Trans-Asian railways, the Trans-Asian highways are going to go through Manipur.
Yes.
So we need to, if Manipur is so central in connecting India with Southeast Asia, then it is not beyond one's imagination to think that it is going to play a very important role in the future as well. Therefore, there would be a lot of interested parties to control Manipur, right? So, as I said, we don't know, we don't have the evidence at this point of time, but that's a line of thinking that I would like to follow. Right? Who has got interest in Manipur, in controlling Manipur for the future, not in the immediate present, not in the immediate future, but the long-term perspective.
To correct me if I'm wrong over here, like after the fallout of the Soviet Union, the Indian government decided to act, during those times, for economic gains, as you rightly pointed out. But the Act East policy, the train has reached at least the area where we can do trade right now, and those tracks are being laid right now, and the interior parts of Moreh, of Kamjong, and the other parts, this Yeripok area where the three main highways, they've already finished. The conditions are excellent for trucks to go and for heavy vehicles, etc. So do you see that even Manipur, with all its mineral wealth in some ways, Cormile, limestone, gas, petroleum, and recently in an ANI report, they were saying prices of platinum which is much more costly than gold. Do you feel that along with this and the Myanmar resources, of coal, gas, etc. Even coal, gas is there in Manipur right now, as people have pointed right out. Do you think this is something to do, again, this activist policy, of course, is for economic gains or capitalism in one way, but do you see that there's some connection between this present violence?
As I said, you can't rule out the possibilities. So there are two things that we can think about. One is, I think, at a local level, right? Especially the elites. If such future, comes wherein you will have a lot of mining interest, for instance, just to take one example from what you said. So the mining, it's going to be global capital, big capital, right? Who will come and do the mining, and entire operation will be done by global capital. But you will need local, in the old term, what we can call a comprado class, like a local elite, who will facilitate this global capital to operate on the ground. So, in what you had asked, we need to put both of those in the picture, right? That you have this big capital who may be interested not just in the transportation of goods and other kinds of things through transition highways and transition railways, but also in extracting the natural resources which are under the soil, right? So if those big interests have to come in and operate, you will also need at least a certain section of the population who will do the local, infrastructure building, local administration, who will facilitate aggregation of the land and so on and so forth, right? So there is definitely no doubt that if indeed that is going to be the case, then local elites may also be anticipating that in case this interest comes in future, then we have to start preparing from now on. So their involvement in the conflict cannot be ruled out, right? So I think we need to, and as I said, there are different directions that we can look into, and it's we don't know for sure, but every direction has to be looked at with a sense of logic and rationality, and substantiated by evidence. And I think only then would we be able to come to a conclusion of why this violence happened at all, whose interest is it going to serve. As I said, most of these conflicts, there is definitely some interest groups who intend to benefit from a conflict like this. So
an agenda is there,
which means that there will have to be a particular kind of agenda. We don't know for sure whether it has turned out in the way they anticipated. It may also be the case that you have certain kind.
They are also subject to Murphy's law of what can go wrong will obviously go wrong.
Yes. So sometimes what happens is, you start a condition and then you think that you will be able to control in a particular manner, but you can't anticipate people's response. Right.
The best laid plans of men and mice, as they say.
Definitely.
So thank you so much, Oza. And is there anything that you would like to add up as a last comment?
The last comment is more like an appeal, I would say. And the appeal is that we have to think about our future, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come. So whatever we do, we have to keep them in mind that we are creating an atmosphere in which this is not the best conducive atmosphere for children to grow up and learn. So when we talk about peace, we are thinking about their future, right? And if we foreground that future, so not just in the immediate kind of conflict, when we think about environment, when we think about different aspects of what kind of a society are we going to leave behind for them, we have to always keep them at the forefront and say, okay, we are doing this for our children and their children to come. So violence we may be able to justify violence for the short-term gains, but I think in the long run, it's going to harm their future. Violence cannot bring any kind of good
peaceful resolution.
So we have to think about peaceful resolution. There is no other way, right? So I think my appeal would be that everyone, right? Everyone, not just people in Manipur, as I said, but also people in other parts of the country and even globally, must realize that the common people are suffering. It is not in their interest to continue this violence. They're not going to benefit out of this, that's for sure. So if we give them as our focus, then everyone should be working to bring about peace. And I think the initiatives that have come about from the neighborhood in the Northeast, I think that's a very positive initiative. So the other day, we talk about some of these women's leaders who come to Manipur and wrote a report on what is happening. That's a very good initiative, because that comes from a sense of empathy of the people who are suffering. You have had initiatives from eminent citizens in Assam who are calling for peace and dialogue to start. You have initiative from Nagaland, which has come about, which they've suggested
that you have to read it all in, bring it all together.
All together, start a dialogue. In fact, they are ready to facilitate if people want to talk, in Nagaland. Those are, I think, very, very
a good
positive, very positive step that we must take note of and hope that everyone would listen to their good gesture and take that opportunity for our future, the future of children.
We need to focus on the future, not only for ourselves, but for the next generation.
Yes.
And for that, we may have to sacrifice many things, which I get it from you, Ozai, is that we have to be progressive and we have to bring back peace to the land, but through certain objectives, which are like short, maybe long, first, but of stopping the violence and then reaching out to all the displaced people of different sorts, of different communities, at the same time trying to reconcile and bring about law and order and a restoration of peace once again. But at the end, we are not looking only for ourselves, but for the generation, the next generation, which is going to serve Manipur and bring it to its golden moments. Thank you so much for the time. We hope that we'll meet you again in our future programs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.